We already told you not to come. Nadia, your sister is the one getting married. No one is interested in making you feel special today. Sit down or leave. My father said that to me in front of 40 people at my sister's bridal shower. I was 26 years old, holding a gift I had driven 3 hours to deliver, still wearing my coat because I had only been inside the house for 4 minutes. My name is Nadia Calloway. I am 31 now. This is the story of how I was pushed out of my own family, piece by piece, over the course of 2 decades, and what happened at my wedding, when every single one of those pieces came back into the Tao room. The reversal did not happen the way I imagined it. It was quieter than that, and in some ways it was more complete. If you've ever been made to feel like a guest in your own family, stay with me. I'd be grateful to hear your story in the comments, and I hope this one gives you something useful. The house I grew up in sat on a half-acre lot at the end of Millbrook Lane in Claremont, Ohio, a mid-sized town with 2 stoplights, a grain elevator you could smell from the highway, and a particular brand of social cruelty that lived inside churches and kitchen tables. The house itself was a 2-story colonial with white siding and green shutters. My mother, Diane, kept the front beds full of impatiens every summer, the kind of deliberate prettiness that announces effort to the neighbors. My father, Robert, worked in commercial insurance and drove a silver Ford Expedition. He coached my sister's softball team for 3 years and never once attended a single school event of mine. I want to be accurate about this, because accuracy is the only tool I have that cannot be taken from me. I am not saying my childhood was a house of horrors. There was enough food. There were Christmas trees and birthday cakes and a pool in the backyard that we used every summer, until August turned cold. What was wrong with my family was more precise than cruelty, and more durable. It was a hierarchy, and I was at the bottom of it. The ranking worked like this. At the top, my sister, Cassandra, who was 4 years older than me, blonde in the particular way that photographs well, and gifted with the social ease that made adults describe her as a natural. Cassandra was the first grandchild on both sides. She was named after my mother's favorite aunt. She had arrived at the precise moment when my parents were young enough and financially stable enough to lavish everything on her. When Cassandra walked into a room, my mother's posture changed, her voice softened, her hands moved toward her. In the middle, my brother Marcus, 2 years older than me, quiet and mechanical, who occupied the comfortable no-man's land of middle children who have figured out the game and decided not to play it. Marcus was never cruel to me. He was also never there. He disappeared into his garage, to the projects and his friends, and his own life with the efficiency of someone who had read the room correctly from the age of 12. I don't blame him. He was surviving too. At the bottom, me. I was the unplanned 3rd child. A fact I did not learn until I was 14, when I overheard my mother explaining it to her friend Carol over coffee. "We hadn't planned for a 3rd, she said, as matter-of-factly as if she were describing a piece of furniture that had arrived by accident and could not be returned. But here she is! Here she is. I was dark-haired, where Cassandra was fair. I was quiet, where she was magnetic. I was interested in drawing and reading, and later in architecture, none of which produced any visible excitement in my parents. While Cassandra's performances in regional theatre received standing ovations in our living room. I was not ugly or stupid or difficult. I was simply the wrong fit for what my parents had imagined their family would be, and they never quite got over it. The smell of that house in winter was cinnamon and wood smoke from the fireplace. In summer, it was cut grass and chlorine. The kitchen had terracotta floor tiles and a long oak table where we ate dinner together most nights, and where the performance of family cohesion was staged with some regularity. At dinner, my father asked Cassandra about her day with his full attention. When she finished, he moved his gaze to Marcus, asked 1 or 2 questions, and received short answers that satisfied him. He did not, as a rule, ask me about my day when I volunteered information, a grade, a project, something I had made or discovered. He received it the way people receive news, that is neither good nor bad. A blink, a nod, a return to whatever Cassandra was saying. I am telling you this not to build a case for pity. I'm telling you this because it is the root system beneath every single thing that happened afterward. And there was one detail I had not yet understood. It would take me years to find it, but it mattered more than any of them knew. The specific humiliations of my adolescence and young adulthood did not arrive as singular, catastrophic events. They arrived in accumulation, the way water shapes stone, not through force, but through repetition. I had been drawing since I was old enough to hold a pencil, and by 15, I had developed it into something real. My art teacher, Ms. Harrigan, submitted 6 of my pieces to the Central Ohio Regional Youth Art Exhibition without telling me, and 3 of them were selected. I was one of 4 students from our school district to have work shown. The exhibition opening was on a Thursday night in October. Miss Harrigan called our house and spoke to my mother directly, explained what it was, gave her the address and time. I told my mother at dinner that week, I said the art show is Thursday? My pieces are going to be on the wall. Cassandra's high school musical rehearsals ran Thursday nights. My mother looked at me across the terracotta tile and the pot roast and said, "We'll see if we can make it." She said it the way people say it when they mean no. Thursday night came. My parents drove to the school auditorium to watch Cassandra rehearse a production that was still 6 weeks from opening. I took a bus to the exhibition with Ms. Harrigan, stood in front of my 3 framed pieces for 2.5 hours, and when a woman I had never met paused in front of my work for a long time and said to her companion, "This one is extraordinary," I pressed my thumbnail into my palm so that I would not cry in a room full of strangers. I did not cry. I learned that night to hold still inside moments that deserved a reaction. When I came home, my mother was in the kitchen. She said, "How was it?" I said, "Good." She said, "Good," and turned back to the sink. That was the first time I understood the shape of my position. Not that night, exactly. But later, looking back, that night is where the shape became clear. When Cassandra left for Ohio State on a partial theater scholarship, my parents provided her with a supplementary fund of $45,000 drawn from a college savings account that had been opened in her name when she was 3 months old. When I was 17, I asked my parents directly about college planning. We sat in the living room, the 3 of us, in November. The fireplace was lit. My father had his reading glasses on and a legal pad in his lap, which I now understand was either a prop or a record of something that had already been decided. "There isn't a separate account for you," my father said. He did not look away from the legal pad when he said it. We weren't in a position to fund 3 accounts. We funded Cassandra's and Marcus's. Marcus chose not to use his, so that money is now returned to the household. For you, we can contribute a few thousand toward community college. If you want a 4-year school, you'll need loans and work study. Marcus's fund had been $22,000. He had gone to trade school on a scholarship and did not draw from it. That money went back to my parents. I said, "Okay." I did not argue. I had already been accepted to the architecture program at the University of Cincinnati on academic merit. I took out $47,000 in federal and private loans. I worked 22 hours a week at a campus print shop for 3 years. I graduated with honors and $53,000 in debt. No one in my family attended my graduation. Cassandra was performing in a community theater production that weekend in Columbus. My parents drove to Columbus. They sent me a card with $100 inside. My mother's handwriting, "So proud of you, Mom and Dad." I kept the card. I put it in a box I labeled in my own handwriting evidence as a private joke with myself. I was not joking. By 22, I had moved to Cincinnati, started a junior position at a small architecture firm, and returned home for major holidays with the particular vigilance of someone who has learned that going home costs something. Thanksgiving, 2 years after graduation. 19 people at the table. My parents, Cassandra and her then-boyfriend, Derek, Marcus and his wife, Patrice, aunts and uncles, 2 family friends, my maternal grandmother, Nana Ruth, who was 78 and who was, in the full taxonomy of my family, the one person who saw me clearly. My mother had made a seating arrangement, Cassandra was at my father's right hand, which was the position of honor at that table, and had been since we were children. I was seated between two of my mother's cousins at the far end, beside the kitchen door that swung open every time someone retrieved something from the oven. At some point during the meal, my Aunt Lorraine asked me about my work. I had recently contributed to a design for a mixed-use building in the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood that was getting written up in a regional publication. I started to describe it. My father, from the other end of the table, turned and said, "Cassandra, tell them about the Chicago audition." I stopped mid-sentence. Cassandra told them about the Chicago audition. 14 minutes passed before anyone spoke to me again, and that was my cousin asking me to pass the cranberry sauce. Nana Ruth caught my eye from across the table. She held my gaze for 3 seconds and gave me a small, deliberate nod. It was the nod of someone who sees it. Cost her something in that room, and she gave it to me anyway. I let it go. I should not have let it go. But I was 22, and I was still hoping that if I was patient and composed and good enough, the equation would eventually balance. It would not balance on its own. I know that now. Cassandra got engaged in January to a man named Preston Whitfield III, a corporate attorney from Columbus, who wore monogrammed cufflinks and laughed too loudly at his own observations. The wedding was set for October. I received no phone call. I received an invitation by mail in February, addressed in my mother's handwriting to the engagement party, and a separate printed card indicating that the bridal shower would be held at my parents' home on the 14th of April. I drove 3 hours from Cincinnati. I had wrapped a gift, a hand-bound photo album I had made myself, with archival paper and a linen cover that held photographs I had collected and printed of Cassandra from childhood through adulthood, organized chronologically. It had taken me 11 hours to make. I had also enclosed a gift card for $200 to the couple's listed registry. I arrived at 2:14 p.m. The shower had begun at 1. I had texted my mother from the road to say I was running behind due to construction on I-71. She did not respond. There were 40 people in my parents' living room and dining room when I walked in. I was still wearing my coat. I had just come through the door. My father was standing near the fireplace. He turned when I entered. His expression did not change into anything welcoming. It changed into something controlled and flat. And then he said, loudly enough that the conversations nearest to him went, "Quiet. We already told you not to come, Nadia. Your sister is the one getting married. No one is interested in making you feel special today. Sit down or leave." 30 of those 40 people heard it. I watched their faces. Some looked away immediately, the practiced social exit of people who do not want to choose. Some looked at me with something that might have been pity, though in that family's social circle, pity and contempt were stored very close together. Cassandra, seated in the center of the room in a blush-colored dress, looked at me for exactly 2 seconds. And then she smiled at something her friend to her left had said. Nana Ruth was in the dining room. I could see her from where I stood. She had heard it, her jaw set. She did not look away from me. I set the gift down on the entry table. I said nothing. I buttoned my coat back up, one button at a time, which gave me something to do with my hands. I walked back out of the house and I sat in my car in the driveway for 11 minutes. Then I drove home. I drove 3 hours in complete quiet. No music, no podcast, the sound of the engine and the tires and, at one point, rain starting on the windshield, light at first and then harder. I did not call anyone that night. I did not text Marcus. I did not write in the journal I had been keeping since I was 15. I made tea when I got home and I sat at my kitchen table in Cincinnati and I looked at the wall. Here is what I knew. I had driven 3 hours. I had made an 11-hour gift. I had been told, in front of 40 people, that my presence was an imposition. My sister had not said a word. My mother, I found out later from Nana Ruth, had been in the kitchen when I arrived and had not come out. And here is what I decided. I was done trying to belong to that family on their terms. I was not going to confront them. I was not going to send an email detailing every grievance from the last 2 decades. I was not going to cry to Marcus or wait for an apology or explain myself to my mother's friends on Facebook. None of that was going to give me what I needed, and more importantly, none of that was going to be true. What would be true was this: I was going to build my own life completely and without apology. And when the moment came, and I believed, sitting at that table, that a moment would come, I was going to be ready. I went to bed at 11 o'clock. I slept for 8 hours. The next morning, I called Nana Ruth. Nana Ruth was the first person I told. Not all of it. She had been at the shower, she had heard the sentence, she had seen my face. What I told her was the decision. I'm not going back, I said. Not to the house, not to events where I am a guest by permission. I'm not doing it anymore. There was a pause on the line. Ruth Adelman, Whitmore, 78 years old, former high school English teacher, keeper of every letter anyone had ever written to her, said, "Good. It's about time now. Tell me what you need." What I needed, it turned out, was documentation. Not in a litigious sense. My parents had not committed crimes, but in a structural sense, because over the years I had been told things, given or denied things, and I had let them pass without record. And there was one particular matter, the matter of my maternal grandmother's estate, that I had let pass for 5 years without looking at directly. My maternal grandmother, Nana Ruth's older sister, Eleanor, had died when I was 21. Eleanor had been, in the family's private ranking, a woman of some means. She had owned a property in Sandusky, Ohio, a 6-bedroom lake house that had been in the family for 40 years, and a portfolio of municipal bonds that at the time of her death had a market value of approximately $312,000. Eleanor had liked me. She had told me so, directly, more than once. She had seen my drawings when I was young, and had a particular one, framed and hung in the Sandusky house. She had attended my high school graduation when my parents did not, having driven from Sandusky at the age of 74 because, she said, someone should be there who gives a damn. Eleanor died without a formal will. She had expressed wishes, verbally, on at least 3 occasions, according to Nana Ruth, that the Sandusky property and a portion of the bond portfolio be preserved in a manner that would eventually benefit me. She had not formalized those wishes. When she died, her estate passed to her surviving children and their families under Ohio intestate succession, which meant it was divided among my mother, 2 of Eleanor's other children, and their descendants. My mother received approximately $87,000 in bonds and an equal share of the Sandusky property, which was sold in 2018 for $740,000. My mother's share of the sale, $246,667. I knew none of these numbers at the time. I knew that money had changed hands and that I had not been mentioned. What I did not know, and what Nana Ruth told me in that phone call in April, slowly and precisely, the way someone reveals a thing they have been holding for a long time, was that Eleanor had written a letter, not a formal will, a letter, handwritten, dated 14 months before her death, addressed to my mother and her siblings, stating her wishes in explicit terms. In that letter, Eleanor wrote that she wanted $75,000 from the bond portfolio placed in trust for me. For Nadia, her words, according to Nana Ruth who had read the letter, she is the one who will need it. She sees things the rest of them have decided not to see. My mother had received that letter. My mother's siblings had received copies. None of them had acted on it. It was not legally binding. They were under no obligation to honor it. But they had known. Nana Ruth had a copy of the letter. She had made one, she said, the night after Eleanor's funeral, because she had read the room correctly, and she was an English teacher who understood the importance of keeping the text. I asked Nana Ruth to send it to me. She mailed it that week, certified post, in an envelope that also contained a handwritten note of her own. I have been waiting for you to be ready to know this. You are ready now? I sat with the letter for a week before I did anything else. Then I called David Osei. David had been my closest friend since our second year at the University of Cincinnati. We had met in a structures course, had studied together, and had arrived at a friendship of the specific kind that forms between people who recognize each other's fundamental nature early. David was now a licensed architect at a larger firm in Columbus. He was also, by the time I called him, the person I was going to marry. Though neither of us had said so out loud yet, I told David everything: the shower, the decision, the letter. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" "I want to understand what I'm actually owed," I said, "not legally. I already know that's nothing. I want to understand what the truth is. I want documentation of the truth. And then I want to move forward." David said, "Then let's start there." Over the next 6 months, I assembled what I came to think of as the archive. It was not assembled for a lawsuit. It was assembled because I believe in knowing things precisely. The archive included the letter from Eleanor, dated March 2014, Nana Ruth's written account, 11 pages, of family meetings and conversations she had witnessed between 2014 and 2019, in which Eleanor's wishes were discussed and declined. My own records of the college fund conversation. I had written it down in a journal entry the same night it happened. Date, place, amounts, exact words. $45,000 for Cassandra. $22,000 for Marcus. Returned, unused. A few thousand for me toward community college. $0 in a dedicated account. Documentation of my own student loan balance as of April 2022. $38,400 remaining on a total of $53,000 borrowed. I had been paying it down for 6 years. My pay stubs from the print shop, which I had kept in a shoebox for reasons I could not have explained at the time, but which now seemed obvious. My performance reviews from the architecture firm, 3 of which included the language exceptional, and 1 of which included the specific phrase, "among the most talented junior architects this firm has employed in a decade." I had received 2 raises and a promotion in 4 years. A note from Ms. Harrigan, my high school art teacher, whom I had tracked down on LinkedIn and reached out to in the fall. I told her I was building a personal archive and asked if she had any record of my work in the regional exhibition. She replied within a day with a PDF of the original program, which listed my 3 pieces by name and a personal note that said, "Nadia, I have thought about you often. I always knew you would make something of yourself. I'm sorry your family wasn't there to see it." I printed Ms. Harrigan's email and added it to the archive. I consulted an estate attorney, a woman named Margaret Osei Bonsu, who had an office in downtown Cincinnati and who had been recommended to me by a colleague at my firm. I showed her Eleanor's letter. She reviewed it and told me what I already knew. It was not enforceable. There was no legal cause of action. My mother and her siblings had been under no obligation to act on it, and the statute of limitations on any conceivable. The claim had long since expired. What she said next is what I wanted on record. This letter establishes intent. It won't win you anything in court, but it establishes that someone in your family made a deliberate choice to override a dying woman's stated wishes on your behalf. That is a fact. You can know that fact, and you can decide what to do with it. I thanked her and paid her $350 for 90 minutes of her time. She shook my hand at the door and said, "I hope things go better for you from here." They already were. David proposed in November, 8 months after the bridal shower, over dinner at a restaurant in Columbus where we had eaten on our first date. He had not told anyone in either family beforehand. He called his mother after. He did not call mine. We set our wedding date for October 14th of the following year. I called my mother on a Tuesday in January to tell her we were engaged. She said, "Oh well, that's nice. Is he from Columbus?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Will you have the wedding there?" I said we weren't sure yet. She said, "Well, let us know." I told her I would. I did not ask for her involvement in the planning. I did not ask her for her guest list. I did not ask for her opinion on venues or flowers or catering. She did not offer. The venue was Halcyon House, a restored 1920s estate outside Columbus, booked 14 months in advance. The ceremony was in the garden, beneath a pergola, draped in white wisteria that had taken 60 years to grow into the current shape. The reception was inside, in a hall with walnut floors and tall windows. David's family was large and joyful. His parents, Kwame and Abena Ose, had flown in from Accra. His sisters, 3 of them, had been in regular contact with me for a full year. His mother had called me every month simply to talk. She had asked about my work, my designs, my ideas for the ceremony, my mother's participation. I had told her, carefully, that my mother and I were not close. She had received this without drama, placed her hand over mine in the way of someone who knows when a sentence contains a longer story, and said, "Then we are your family on this side." She had meant it. There were 118 guests at our wedding. My family occupied one section of the seating. My mother and father, Marcus and his wife Patrice, Cassandra and Preston, married the previous October, at which I had been a guest, seated in the second to last row, and not included in the bridal party despite being her sister, and 3 of my parents' friends from Claremont who had made the drive. Nana Ruth sat in the first row on my side. She was 81 years old. She had driven herself from Sandusky. She wore a blue suit and a hat. When I walked up the aisle on my own, I had chosen to do so, a choice my father had objected to and then said nothing further about. Nana Ruth was the first person I looked at. She was crying, quietly, in the dignified way of someone who has been saving a particular emotion for a long time. The ceremony was 18 minutes long. There were no incidents. The reception was dinner and dancing and speeches and the particular warmth of a room full of people who wanted to be there. David's father spoke for 7 minutes and managed to be funny and profound in approximately equal measure. My maid of honor, a woman named Celestine Diello, who had been my closest friend in the architecture program and who was now an associate at a firm in Chicago, spoke for 5 minutes and said things about me that I will not repeat here because they belong to that room. She had known me for 9 years. She said the things that are true. My father did not give a toast. This had been a decision made jointly by my parents, communicated to me through my mother's brief email 2 weeks before the wedding. "Your father doesn't think he'd be up for a speech. We hope you understand." I had written back, "Understood." At dinner, I was seated at the head table with David, his parents, Celestine, and David's best man. My parents were at a table near the windows with Marcus and Patrice, and 2 of David's cousins who had been placed there. Deliberately, because they were warm, funny people who could carry any table, my mother came to find me after dinner. The dancing had started. She touched my arm and I turned. She was wearing a navy dress and pearl earrings, and she looked, in that moment, the way parents look at weddings, slightly outside of time, slightly surprised by the fact of the occasion. She said, "You look beautiful." I said, "Thank you." She said, "I want you to know I'm glad we came." I looked at her. I said, "I'm glad you came too." That was not nothing. It was not everything. It was exactly what it was. My father found me an hour later, near the bar. He had been drinking a moderate amount. He stood beside me and looked at the dance floor, where David was dancing with his mother. My father said, "He seems like a good man." I said, "He is." My father nodded. He said after a pause, "I know we haven't always done right by you, Nadia." I waited. He said nothing more than that. I said, "I know," that was all. Cassandra found me in the hallway outside the restrooms near the end of the evening. She was wearing a green dress. She had been pleasant all evening, performatively so, in the way of someone who understands that the stage has shifted. She said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I said, "Sure." She said, "I'm sorry about the shower." "For what Dad said?" I looked at her. "Did he apologize to you?" she asked. I said, "He said he knew they hadn't always done right by me." She nodded. She looked down at her shoes, expensive ones, nude-toned heels, and said, "I didn't stop him. I didn't say anything. I should have." I said, "Yes." She had been expecting me to either absolve her or break apart, and I did neither. I said, "I appreciate you saying it. I mean that." And I walked back to my wedding. The detail I had missed years earlier, the thing I had not understood, was that none of them were monsters. They were people who had chosen, repeatedly and deliberately, to see me as less than I was, and who had constructed a family structure that allowed that choice to feel normal. The cruelty was in the mundane architecture of it, the preference, the omission, the silence. The father who gave a toast at one daughter's wedding and not the others. The letter from a dying woman, unfollowed and unfiled. The moment of reversal was not a speech or a revelation or a confrontation. It was the room itself. It was 118 people who had come because they wanted to be there. It was Nana Ruth in the front row in her blue suit. It was David's mother calling me every month for a year. It was Celestine standing at a microphone, saying the true things. It was my father standing beside me at the bar, saying the 4 words, "We haven't always," and choosing not to finish. The antagonist's physical reaction to all of it. My mother, at the end of the night, sitting at her table with her handbag in her lap and her pearls and her navy dress, watching the dance floor with an expression I can only describe as the look of someone who is doing the arithmetic and finding the sum unfamiliar. I walked to her table before the evening ended. I kissed her on the cheek. I said, "Thank you for coming." She patted my hand. She said, "Of course," as if it had never been in question. I let her have that. I want to tell you what happened to the specific things, because I believe in specifics. My parents drove back to Claremont the morning after the wedding. My mother sent me a card that arrived 11 days later. It said, "It was a beautiful wedding. David is wonderful. We are proud of you." My father's signature was at the bottom. I put it in the archive box, not as evidence, as record. Cassandra and I have spoken 4 times in the 18 months since the wedding. The conversations are civil and cautious and carry the particular texture of 2 people who have decided, without discussing it, to proceed carefully. She has not referred to the shower again. I have not raised it. I do not know what this will become. I am not waiting to find out. Marcus called me the week after the wedding. He said it had been a beautiful day. He said, after a long pause, "I know I wasn't there for a lot of things. I'm sorry about that." I said, "I know." He said, "I've been thinking about it a lot lately." I said, "Me too." We talked for 45 minutes, which is the longest phone conversation Marcus and I have had in our adult lives. His voice is still the voice of someone practicing a language he does not yet speak fluently. I am patient with it. I can afford to be. Nana Ruth called me from the road on the drive back to Sandusky the day after the wedding. She said she had to pull over because she was crying too hard to drive safely. She said, "I watched you walk up that aisle and I thought of Eleanor. She would have been in the front row beside me." I said, "I know she would have." Nana Ruth said she was right about you. She saw it all the way. I did not trust myself to speak for a moment. Then I said, "I know, I've always known." Nana Ruth is 81. She is in good health. She calls every Sunday. The archive box is in my home office in Columbus, in the bottom drawer of my desk, between a set of blueprints and the certificate from my architectural licensure exam. I have not opened it since the wedding. I do not think I will need to. The student loan balance is $14,200. At my current payment rate, I will be finished in 14 months. The mixed-use building in Over the Rhine was completed in 2022. It has been featured in 3 regional publications and 1 national architectural journal. My name is in the credits. The photo album I made for Cassandra's bridal shower, 11 hours of work, archival paper, linen cover, was on the entry table when I left the house that April afternoon. I did not take it back. I do not know what became of it. I am 31 years old. I live in Columbus with David in a house we designed together in the specific way that 2 architects design a house when they are in love and in agreement about light. There are large windows. There is a studio on the 2nd floor where I draw. There is, in the back garden, a Japanese maple that is 3 years old and will be extraordinary in 20 years. I have thought about what I lost, and I want to name it precisely. I lost the version of childhood where a parent's face changes when you enter a room. I lost the bridal shower, where people clap for you and hold up your gifts and talk about your future. I lost the father's toast. I lost the $75,000 that a dying woman wanted me to have, and that was redirected into a house in the suburbs that I was not invited to visit. These are real losses. I am not going to dress them up as gifts or lessons. They cost me something real. What I gained? The knowledge that I can build everything I need. Not figuratively, architecturally and literally and in every other sense. I have built a career and a home and a marriage and a circle of people who know me completely and choose to stay. I built it on $53,000 in loans, 22 hours a week at a print shop, and the particular discipline that comes from learning early that no one is going to do this for you. I gained Nana Ruth fully as mine, which is to say I gained the experience of being seen completely by someone who chose to see me without any political advantage in doing so. I gained David, who heard the whole story before he proposed and then proposed anyway. which is the only correct order. I gained myself, which sounds like a platitude and is not. There is a version of this story in which I spent the next 20 years trying to earn my way into a family that had already decided the terms. I didn't. I sat at my kitchen table in Cincinnati on a Sunday night and I looked at the wall and I chose. That choice cost me something too, but it was mine to make. If this story found you at a moment when you're still trying to earn your way in, I'd like to hear what you took from it. Sometimes the most useful thing is knowing that someone else sat at that table and made a different decision. What I understand now is this. Belonging is not given, it is not owed, it is not inherited. You can wait your whole life at a table where you have been assigned the wrong seat, or you can build a different table entirely. I built the table. I am the architect of my own life. That is not a metaphor. That is my name for myself. And it took me 31 years, one long drive home, one archive box, and one morning when I picked up the phone and called the person who had always believed in me, to know it completely and without any remaining doubt.